Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Jim Laird. He is a health and wellness coach, and we'll learn from him about his expertise on helping men over 40 achieve their fitness goals. Welcome to the show, Jim.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
You are welcome. Welcome to the show. Welcome to India in this online form, Jim. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we are going to learn from you. We'll be learning about how you are empowering men over 40 to achieve optimal health that we talked about. But before that, let's talk about bit about your journey, Jim, a bit
Sure.
about your background so that the audience knows who they are listening to.
Okay. Basically, I've been a strength and conditioning coach / wellness coach for, almost 30 years now. And I started out in college. I worked at the University of Arizona. I also worked at Liberty University. And then I ended up moving to Lexington, Kentucky, where I started working with athletes. And then I kind of pivoted into working with a lot of women, actually. Trained women for back then in the early 2000s, late 1990s. There wasn't a lot of women in the weight room. So I noticed that if I got women lifting weights, that they would dramatically change their physique and their health and wellness in general. So opened several gyms, worked with a number of professional athletes over the years, overcame a few health challenges. One was around 08, 09. I got ulcerative colitis. I was able to change that, manage that through diet and lifestyle change. I was basically working too much, not sleeping enough, was training too hard. And then later on, I ended up almost having my leg amputated because I got a pedicure. And I was having reoccurring infections from that. And I was able to defeat that by living a more outdoor life. I've become a human zoo animal. So now I live in Nicaragua. I do all my interviews outside here on my patio in my forest jungle that I live in. And so I spend the majority of my time outside. That's what's been able to fixing my circadian rhythm. After that, before I moved down here, I was in Florida and I was in a really bad car accident and a guy rear-ended me and I had to basically rehabilitate myself back from, I was having trouble walking and talking. And then I teamed up with a guy named Dr. Leland Stillman. So for the past 2 years, I've been bringing coaching into his medical practice and accountability. So I've worked with every person you could possibly imagine. So now my main focus is on men over 40, helping them, restore vitality and so they can continue to chase excellence. But I have, professional athletes I work with, women I work with. So I work with everyone. I just tend to focus a little more on men these days because it's a little more relatable to me because I'm 50 years old. I turned 50 in April. And then I also have a men's group that I just started called the Vitality Brotherhood.
Right, Jim. And I can tell you how nice it looks, the natural background that you have. And,
Thank you.
in fact, I was, nowadays you got to see so many, artificial ones that I thought I will ask about that. But then could you mention that this is actually very natural
Yes.
and I can understand what it can do to overall health. And this is nature. This is true nature. And it forget about just you from feeling, from far away in
Yeah.
New Delhi, I can just feel that the winds, blowing there and all the greenness of the trees. I am, inhaling that green
Sure.
into me, and
Well,
it feels so great.
you've seen a very large spike in diabetes and health issues in general in India in the last 5 to 10 years. And a lot of that is because a lot of Indians that traditionally lived outdoor lives, spent time outdoors, are now going indoors and working on computers and doing tech jobs. So I think that's one of the main reasons that there's such a huge spike in diabetes in India in particular. And as these developing countries become, more like the West, where you spend most of your time indoors, you see a higher incidence of, blood pressure, diabetes, depression, all these things. So a lot of this is it's a Western thing from an indoor lifestyle. So a lot of what I do is talking to guys about, hey, like you spent the last 15, 20 years of your life in front of a screen. You need to get outside. You need to get in nature. You need to spend some time outdoors.
Absolutely. So to understand from you, Jim, better is that especially for men over 40, one
Hmm.
is the natural, health issues that can come with age 40.
Hmm.
But then what are the bigger challenges that we are talking about when you talk
Hmm.
about men over 40 with regards to health,
Sure. Yeah.
vitality, in terms of overall things that you generally come to know of?
Well, there's two categories of men in particular, and even women in general. Um, there's the category of people that have just completely let themselves go completely. Maybe they've immersed themselves in work, or they just are eating whatever they want. They just kind of let themselves go. And then you've got the other side, which is like the extreme entrepreneur type. They've not only poured themselves into business, but they've trained really hard. They've competed in things, or they're workout aholics, and they crash and burn because they just haven't rested enough. So it's actually a lot easier to work with the people that have kind of just let themselves go, and just like maybe they work a lot, but they aren't exercise freaks. It's a lot harder to convince somebody that has exercised, a lot, that maybe they need to dial it back. Maybe they need to make some different choices. It's a lot easier to get a person that's unmotivated to do more than it is to get somebody who's over motivated to do less, if that makes sense. So a lot of it depends on who I'm working with, but most of it, it's like, they just haven't spent enough time outside. They haven't made time for themselves. They've invested, most of their time in their business, between their family, their business. They don't have any time for self-care. Usually it's like fast food, and, maybe they've developed a drinking habit. That's how they manage their stresses, through drinking. So a lot of what I have to do is like, unpack habits and rebuild habits, and talk to them about managing workloads, and so it all depends on the type of person that I'm working with. But I find it easier to work with somebody who's a little bit on the lazy side, maybe with the exercise component, than it is to work with somebody who's burned the candle at both ends. They're exhausted, they don't feel good, maybe they're sick, and then you get them to start feeling again, and they take off like a rocket again. Whereas the person that hasn't really traditionally exercised, usually they won't like just take off like a rocket. Usually they'll systematically just improve. Whereas the person that is a high achiever, type A personality, and they crash and burn, and I fall into that category. I'm one of those people that have to learn the hard way. Those are generally the people that are a little more difficult to work with.
Right, right, Jim. So to understand about, especially for men or women over 40, is that
Hmm.
many of these people, they are working hard, living
Hmm.
hard, doing
Yep.
whatever, but they don't have any medical problem as such, or any big medical problem as such.
Not
But
yet.
then one big one, not yet, yes.
Yeah.
So what is the problem here that they can? Secondly, a lot of them, medically they may be fine, clinically they may be fine, but there is this
Sure.
thing called exhaustion. You feel
Sure.
exhausted so much of time, but still you have
Hmm.
to carry on. That's their choice. Help us
Right.
understand these two parts. What is it that can happen in terms
Hmm.
of health when you are living the way as you described? And second thing is about exhaustion. Is it
Yeah.
about because you have the phone in your hand at night and wake up with the phone? Help us understand in the wider level so that people understand about things better.
Well, I think it's our modern life. I compare modern life to getting in your car in the driveway, starting it up and revving the living hell out of it, and never driving anywhere. So you're just sitting in your driveway revving your car. You don't go anywhere, and then you wonder why the car breaks down and the car isn't running well, even though you haven't driven anywhere. And that's modern life. You're scrolling through the phone. I think the lighting environment is a huge role in that. People are up looking at their phone. They're watching Netflix late at night. They're not getting out in the sun. We don't have People are not bored anymore. They don't sit in silence. They don't relax. There's this constant um, push, particularly in the West, to be busy all the time. Like you constantly have to be doing something. You constantly have to be thinking. You're always texting. You're always doing something. There's no time to relax and decompress and enjoy yourself. And the only relaxation time isn't truly relaxation. It's watching a show or it's scrolling through a phone. There's never any like just go out in the forest and just relax and enjoy nature and listen to the birds and be present. Most people are on the phone, they're eating their meal, and then they're having a conversation with four different people. So it's this constant state of alertness, it's this constant state of arousal. And we're built to do manual low level labor all day, and we've replaced that with just chronic emotional and psychological stress. And I think the manual labor part of things is very therapeutic to the human. But this chronic low level stress, if you read Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers by Robert Sapolsky, he gets into like what happens to people that are under this constant chronic low level of stress. It affects digestion and it affects reproductive health. It affects mental health. You're using all these hormones and resources up to combat this low level stress instead of digestion, instead of cognitive function, instead of hormone production. So over time, as you get to 40, you don't have the ability to adapt, and your body isn't as resilient as it was when you were younger. So things start to catch up with you in your 40s. You're all of a sudden things start hurting. All of a sudden you don't have the energy you used to have, and then people start reaching for whether it's hormone replacement therapy, or they reach for things like modafinil or nicotine or caffeine. They don't sleep, and they start over caffeinating, and then before you know it, they end up sick or burned out or with some sort of issue because they're trying to just like, I have low energy, so I'm going to get on thyroid, or instead of fixing the root foundational issues, which is like broken circadian rhythm, not enough rest. And I'm all for working hard. The problem is people just don't understand. The harder you work, the harder you have to rest. And Paul Chek had this wonderful saying that I learned the hard way when I got colitis. In order to work out, or in order to push, you have to work in. And I use the car analogy all the time. These top fuel dragsters that run down the racetrack and do these like incredibly insane, quarter mile times, they rebuild the engine on that car after every race, right? You don't obviously rebuild the engine on your Corolla or your Toyota just driving it around town. So if you're driving your body hard, you've got to put a lot of effort into relaxing and shutting off. Just like in order to have the daytime, there also has to be the nighttime. I think our modern world, particularly in the West, there's this constant state of go, go, go all the time. Like don't rest, like sleep when you're dead. That sort of thing has been a big pushed on people for a long period of time. And that works fine for some people for a while, but eventually you're going to pay the price. And usually that price is when you hit 40, 50, the wheels start coming off the wagon. And that's where we need to do a rebuild instead of looking for, there's nothing wrong with things like TRT or peptides or some of these tools. The problem is you don't fix a foundation with tools. You fix a foundation, you build a foundation on a foundation. You don't use tools to you don't make your foundation out of tools. And there's a lot of people that are reaching for these tools to fix a foundational issue.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Jim, you explained it very well. We'll come to this fitness part. Let's talk about, silence part. You talked about that. There is a lot of loneliness, but no solitude. How
Yes.
do we do this? How do we get this silent
Right.
part in our lives? And what are the benefits that we are missing in our day-to-day life from the silence that you are talking about? Tell us a bit. And how is it possible in today's
Sure.
time?
Well, I think you have to consciously make a choice. You look at most major religious leaders, in Psalms, it says, be still and know. But if you look at the major religious leaders from each religion, most of them, like Jesus, went into nature to kind of get away from everything and to connect, with God or whatever. nature, going and making time, whether you use a modern day version of nature, which is like a float tank where you go into a tank and you float in Epsom salt in this silence. And a lot of people I was very uncomfortable when I tried to sit quietly. I had all these thoughts racing in my head. It took me a while to learn how to sit in silence, but just the decompression and the lowering of stress, putting the tongue in the roof of your mouth, breathing through your nose. There's a lot of tools like binaural beats, and like Andrew Uberman has a great 10-minute non-sleep deep rest. It's not silence, but it teaches you to be still and to breathe and to relax. But just going into nature and just sitting in a park bench and just listening to the birds, or going for a walk and leaving your phone behind, focusing on breathing through your nose the entire time and making it more of an observation exercise as opposed to having music or a podcast on and trying to burn calories. Just putting more energy back into the system is super duper important. And a lot of people are just emotionally and mentally exhausted because they're just spinning in their head all day. And then when they try to sleep, they can't sleep because they just don't feel comfortable they go try to shut their mind off, and they have to scroll because their mind is just racing all the time. I like to do things like a mind dump before bed, where I write everything down on a piece of paper that's in my head, and no matter how crazy it is, and then I tear it up and throw it in the trash. And then I do some breathing drills before I go to bed to help get me wound down. And obviously I get the phone out of my hand and things like that. But silence is such a huge part. And then daily movement, like moving throughout the day. I love like 10-minute walks after meals. Just after you eat, go for a 10-minute walk, and here's another big tip a lot of people don't really think about. Like, most people just inhale their food. It's like, sit down, take a couple breaths, be present, thank the Lord or whatever you believe, be grateful for your food. Take a moment, put the phone down, and actually chew and enjoy and savor your food. Chew it up to the point where it's liquid. Take 10 or 15 minutes to eat instead of just like shoveling it in. A lot of people that I deal with that have digestive issues, or they're having problems with their weight, if they just slowed down and actually enjoyed their food and actually chewed it, they wouldn't have these cravings, because they'd actually be satisfied and they'd actually start absorbing and digesting the food better. So I think a lot of people, because they're stressed and they're in this constant state of like hamster wheel, a lot of people just inhale or just eat to make them feel better. It's like kind of medicating themselves, right? So the more you can practice being present, and then the cool thing is when you do rest and you do take the time to recover and you do take the time to be mindful, when you do go train, you can train hard. It's just that when we're done, we want to shut that off and we want to relax, so that you take care of yourself so you can push yourself harder in the long run. We just need to like push and then rest, push and then rest. And then you need to work these things into your life. Like, if you've got 2 or 3 weeks that are going to be really difficult, then you need to like schedule 2 or 3 weeks that are a little easier so you can recover from that. Most people don't consciously schedule rest into their life, and they really need to. Particularly high level CEOs will schedule things like float tank or acupuncture or massage into their life so that they have this hour once a week where they're going in and they're just going to relax and let go. So those are things that you can do to kind of offset a lot of our modern world, which kind of sucks us into this cycle, which I call the complacent, compliant consumer. If you're constantly stressed and you're constantly wound up, you just become this kind of being that just buys stuff, and that's pretty much what they want you to do.
Absolutely, Jim. Now you talk about those people who do not get chance to look at themselves, live the natural life, to walk and just
Mm-hmm.
live with nature and do a bit of exercise. But then there are some people who do a lot of it. Now help
Yes.
us understand then, what is it that they are doing wrong? They are working hard and also running hard, training hard. What is the problem there? What could be the problem there?
Well, a lot of times for me, I used exercise to manage stress and trauma and anger that I'd had from my past. And so there's a lot of people out there that are using exercise almost like food. So people will use food, they'll use alcohol, maybe they'll use, relationships or men in particular, pornography to medicate themselves, right? So exercise is no different. The difference with exercise is like when I was a kid, I was acting out in school because of some of the things that were going on when I was growing up. And instead of like the pastor of my church or the counselors at school saying, "Hey, why is this kid acting this way?" They're like, "Oh, this kid's fairly aggressive. He's very athletic. Let's put him in football. Let's put him in rugby. Let's put him in these sports, wrestling, where, he can act out on his aggression." Well, so I went into those sports and I got praised. "Oh my gosh, you're amazing. Good." I got a lot of the validation that I didn't get at home. Right. And so I, you know, basically knocked the crap out of people and trained really hard because I was getting validation. And that's how I dealt with my anger instead of dealing with the actual problem. So a lot of people have these traumas or these issues in their lives, inadequacy, or they don't like themselves. And so they start working out and people are like, "Wow, that's amazing. This is so great. It's so wonderful." It'd be different if they were a heroin addict or an alcoholic or whatever. But there comes a point where I've worked with a lot of exercise addicts who literally destroy themselves training, and it's an addiction. And for me, I had to learn how to train because I loved my body, not because I needed something to express anger and hatred. I needed to forgive some people. I needed to put some things behind me. But a lot of people, if you read the book, The Body Keeps the Score, obsessive compulsive, overworking, that kind of behavior is highly associated with people who have experienced some high levels of trauma in the past. So that's where things like EMDR therapy and neurofeedback and things like that, where you can get this stuff out, you can deal with it, put it behind you, so you don't need to have these coping mechanisms. But a lot of people use exercise as a coping mechanism for previous trauma, and it's a hard thing to dig yourself out of, whether it's pornography or food or alcohol. These are all coping mechanisms, and one of the ways you deal with it is to get the body healthier in general, which we focus on the 5 fundamental habits, which is walk outside 3 times a day. The morning session is the most important. Eat a protein at every meal, get the lights off at night, drink high quality water, preferably spring water, and then have social connection. The social connection is a huge part of it, particularly for men. A lot of men, when they get married, they have a family, they have a job, they kind of let their friendships with their men, their friends and their buddies kind of disintegrate. And so they end up with like their wife and maybe their kids, and they don't have any friends. And men need to have, they need to go out with men, and they need to like fish, and they need to, they build things and do stuff together. Men need to have that fellowship with men. And a lot of men neglect that. And a lot of people neglect friendships in general. And then they end up in a relationship with one person and it's empty and it doesn't fulfill them. Or that's a lot of pressure to put on a woman or anyone if you're trying to get all of your social needs from 1 or 2 people, as opposed to having a group of people that you rely on. So community is a big part of that. And unfortunately, because of technology, we're more connected than ever because we have this massive fake reality that we're stuck in. But the day-to-day, everyday reality has pretty much died for most people. And that's why most people are so lonely. And that's why, so many people are turning to alcohol, pornography, all sorts of things to make themselves feel better about themselves.
Right, Jim. So how do one get started? Those who are not doing enough exercise or taking enough of nature. And secondly, those people who are doing it too much. You have this training smarter, not harder approach. Tell us a bit about that. Does it work for all sort of people?
Yeah, I mean, so one thing you got to do is look at where you are and what you've got to give your body something it can adapt to. So if you're completely gone, like if you've let yourself go completely, I would start with like just one habit. I would start with getting outside 3 times a day. And if you can't walk, if you're in a really bad place, I would just come out and sit in the sun and get light, or I would get like a recumbent bike, which is like a seat, and I maybe pedal for 5 or 10 minutes. And I'd start with doing that. If that's all you can do, great. Start with that habit. And then we'd add a little bit more. Maybe we add a protein at each meal. That's how we would start with somebody who's in a really bad place. We'd give them 1 or 2 things to do. We'd focus on getting those habits done, and we wouldn't add anything else in until we've got those down so that they're like brushing your teeth. You just do it. And then the person I really like, I took mine off, but I like the Aura ring because you can wear it in airplane mode. It's a ring that basically tells your body, like tells you your HRV, your heart rate variability, your heart rate. It tells you the status of your nervous system. So we can actually look and see like the status of your body, like how much sleep did you get overall, what's going on. And it kind of teaches you like, okay, today your body's in a good place. You can push it a little bit, or your body's not in such a great place. We need more restorative time. We need to relax. And a lot of people that I work with that are really like high level, like engineers, CEOs. I have one lady who's a mother of 7, and she's an engineer, and she's also the president of her family company. And she's like, I thought I was relaxing when I would sit and read a book. And her data was like, no, she was still stressed, even when she was just relaxing and reading a book, because in her mind, she had gotten so used to being stressed that became her normal. So she actually had to learn how to lower her level to go actually into a rest state. So a lot of people get addicted to being in this revved up state. And so she had to learn, and the ring helped her learn what it felt like to actually relax. Because what happens is in our modern world, it's kind of like in your mind, you're driving down the Autobahn at 150 miles an hour or 200 kilometers an hour. And then you pull into a school zone and it tells you to go 15 or 20 kilometers an hour. It's very uncomfortable to drive that slow when you've been driving that fast. So a lot of people actually have to learn how to lower that self down. So for a lot of my overachievers, it's okay. Let's see what your body's actually saying. Let's see what your nervous system says. And then it's a matter of like, okay, let's cut your training back a little bit. And usually they get better results when we cut back what they're doing. And a lot of times the training that they're doing is just for exhaustion. It's not really goal related. There's no real goal to the training. It's just let's do a whole bunch of stuff. And a lot of times people that are over exercisers, they're doing it so they actually are tired enough to relax and sleep. They're doing it to calm themselves down. So a lot of it is teaching them how to self-regulate and do things that can actually, breathing drills and things like that can get them to calm down without them having to wear themselves out to the point of exhaustion.
Right, Jim. And one more thing I want to understand is about the back pain, especially with the 40 plus.
Mm-hmm.
If
Sure.
there is no medical condition and you are living right, why this onset of back pain? Is it only about office, sitting long hours in office, or is it beyond something beyond that?
It could be. There's all sorts of things. One of it, comes to sleep. If you're sleep deprived, you're not in a good place. You're going to have a higher incidence of back pain. I think a lot of it has to do with the seated lifestyle. In the past, you would walk for miles and miles every day. You would move in different ways. Like here in Nicaragua, they're out cutting the field with machetes, and they're carrying sticks on their shoulder, and they're sitting in a deep squat. Like in India and Asia, traditionally, you didn't have chairs until like recently, right? So people would literally sit in a deep squat, or they'd sit on the floor. Traditionally in Asia, India, you'd go to the bathroom in a hole, so you would sit in a deep squat. The toilet is only a recent invention. So that's a big part of it as well. A lot of it has to do with strategy and compression. And so a lot of people will exercise and drive certain strategies that lead to certain positions like extension that generally take away movement options and cause more compression. And so when an area is really compressed, it's really hard to get fluid and nutrients into that area. And and pain is also highly associated with stress. So if you have a highly stressed person, the likelihood of them being in pain is a lot higher. So a lot of it is people just don't move around. Like I get people rolling around on the floor and doing stuff. That's a big part of managing that kind of stuff. And statins, statin drugs, one of the main side effects of being on a statin drug is pain. I would highly recommend reading a book, The Great Cholesterol Myth. It goes into all of that. A lot of the people that I've worked with that are 40 plus, I'm obviously not a doctor, but I give them information, and we give them information so they can make an educated decision. And I'd say, 80, 90% of the people that I work with that were in pain, once they came off that statin, that pain went away. So that has I've seen that cause a lot of back, knee pain and things like that with people as well.
Wonderful, wonderful. That's a lot of great information that you have shared, Jim. Jim. So one more thing. What about the outdoor gym that you aim to set up? When will that be set up?
That's a good question. I had a place picked out here on the beach in Nicaragua when I first moved here, and it ended up not working out. So right now I live more in I lived in a gated community when I moved here, and I wasn't a big fan of that. So I lived there for a few months, and now I'm living near Granada, near Masaya, and I live with the locals. So it's much better. So I'm not sure. The gym thing, I have nikabarbell.com, which I sell shirts that say, hey, don't be a Zoom animal, get outside. I use that to support some local charities that I support. And eventually I want to build an outdoor gym, probably here on the farm that I'm living at, more of a playground type thing. But I kind of put that on hold because the place that I was going to build it at, it just didn't work out. It wasn't a good fit for me. But that's kind of on the back burner right now. But anybody that buys a t-shirt or a mug, I do support local charities. Like I support a local baseball team. I support a couple different organizations that help support local people. I'll buy groceries for families and things like that. So one of the nice things about Nicaragua is my money goes a lot further here and I can help a lot more people, which is really neat.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There is so much to learn about fitness, about health, about life, about light. And so a lot of people who would want to learn more from you, about a lot of about fitness, especially for the 40 plus, what is the best way for them to connect with you, Jim?
Well, if you're over 40 and you're a guy, you can go to vitalitybrotherhood.com. And I have a free group. You can just check it out. Just click on there. If you're over 40 or male, you can join that group. It's free for now. I do 2 coffee calls a week. There's all sorts of great information where you can ask questions and all of that. Probably the other place to follow me is on Instagram. It's GYMLAIRD. My name is Jim, JIM, but my gym in Lexington was called Jim, GYM Laird. So don't ever name a gym after yourself. It doesn't work good when you go to sell it. But that if you're a lady watching this, I do work with ladies as well. But most of my content right now is geared toward 40-year-old men because I'm releasing a coaching program in January where I'm only taking 10 men over 40. And then I also have my men's over 40 group. But, if you're a lady and you want to follow me, go ahead and follow me on Instagram. I put all sorts of great information on there. But that's basically where you can connect with me. There's if you want to talk to me directly, if you're a man or lady, if you want some help before January, or if you want some help in general, there's a coaching link at the top of the Vitality Brotherhood website. If you click on that, it'll take you where you can set up a call with me and we can set up a custom program for you.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.